Frank C. Higgins describes the Freemasonic Lodge as a symbolic workshop. He quotes Mackey's Masonic Encyclopedia as stating that the room should be in the shape of a parallelogram or oblong square at least 1/3 larger from east to west than it is from north to south. Higgins adds to this description that it should be as high as the heavens and as deep as the surface from the center, a representation of the universe on a reduced scale. These phrases, he says, encompass the true spirit of ancient masonry. A plane surface that is 1/3 longer than it is wide is a square, composed of 9 small squares to which 3 are added, making 12, or an oblong 3x4. This figure next to the cube was very sacred in the ancient world. Higgins says that oblongs such as these are found all over the world, but these figures were especially used by ancient Egyptians, who made crude observations of the changes in the sun's apparent diameter and direction from the earth, from day to day, as the correct form of the orbit of Earth. The 3x4 Freemasonic Lodge floor mimics the proportions in the floor plans of ancient temples facing the east that were designed to catch the first rays of the rising sun. The ancients used a 3x4 oblong as a frame for representations of the sun god Helios and or Apollo, and the Egyptians hung them over the portals of their temples. Higgins tells us that the checkered floor pattern was not used by chance. He calls it one of the world's earliest scientific instruments. And he explains it like this: by the movements of the long needle-like shadows cast upon the surface of temple pavements by obelisks at their corners, and in their shadows, provided much information about the sun and its relation to the earth. The 2 pillars or obelisks were placed at the northeast and southeast corners of the temple courts, which were paved with a pattern of alternate white and colored tiles, over spaces that were 1/3 longer from west to east than from north to south. The 2 pillars or obelisks were placed in this fashion so that when the sun rose on the morning of the summer solstice, it rose apparently in the northeast corner of the universe, and the shadow of the corresponding pillar cut the court diagonally. Thus, it described the hypotenuse of the Pythagorean triangle of 3, 4, 5, which was dedicated to Horus in Egypt, Bel in Chaldea, and Baal in Phoenicia and Syria. All of these were representations of the same god of fertility. The differences between the facts registered at different points taught the lessons of latitudes and longitudes, the shape and size of the earth, and the conditions on different parts of its surface. Thus, the oblong square, 1/3 longer from west to east than from north to south, which indicated the motion of all the planets, Higgins tells us, is regarded as a philosophical epitome of the universe. The pillars have long marked the scene of the nightly tragedy of the loss of light and the annual one of the death of nature. Higgins says they are called the Pillars of Hercules because of the scene of the descent into Hades, which constituted the last of the 12 labors of this ancient god. Higgins states that these pillars are ancient and did not originate with the construction of any King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. As evidence for this, he cites the fact that pillars are represented on too many monuments that are far more ancient. In Tyre, they stood before the temple of Melkarth, the Tyrian Hercules, Hiram, king of Tyre. In Egypt, they represented Osiris and Isis. He also says that in his possession, he had an Egyptian amulet showing the Egyptian god Bes, B-E-S, representing Osiris, as the Syrian Baal approaching from the east through the 2 pillars, his head surmounted by 3 plumes that symbolize the letter G, this being an age-old Kabbalism and not a modern symbol. The Egyptians also called these pillars the Pillars of Set or Typhon. According to Higgins, the lodge represents the universe and also represents the ancient philosophical conception of the universe as the manifestation of God to the seer. The temple is an attempt to epitomize the magnificence of the universe and display in dimensions capable of being grasped by the finite mind of man those infinite splendors which attest the plan of the Creator. The earthly temple was the means given by which man, the lesser universe, a creature connected by invisible cords with and swayed by every superior power enthroned in the cosmos with God as ruler, both above and below, might duly comprehend his importance in the scale of creation. Man can realize that he is himself no less the temple of the Holy Spirit than the heavens above were the temple of the Almighty God. Higgins comments that every station, character, and ritualistic action of the terrestrial Masonic Lodge has its counterpart in the heavens. In addition to a lengthy discussion of the significance of the lodge, Higgins writes about such topics as the clothing and tools of a Master Mason, the lion in Freemasonry, the significance of the letter G, the Masonic symbolism of color, and the significance of light in Masonry. He says that there are practical reasons for the selections of certain symbolic working tools of Master Masons, even while acknowledging that these are symbols of a mystic order that descended from the wisdom religions of the past. There are two squares known to Freemasonry. One is the speculative and the other is the operative Mason square. The true square of Freemasonry is the latter, the operative Mason square. Higgins lists the reasons for this fact. The basic arithmetical qualities of the geometry of self-existent proportions found in nature are the numbers 3, 4, and 5, which make up the Pythagorean triangle. In addition to its definition of the angle of 90 degrees, the fourth part of a circle, it also lays out the two most important oblongs, those of 3 by 4 and 4 by 5. The Masonic apron is actually an ancient Egyptian geometrical problem based on the principles of the operative Mason square. Higgins tells us it consists of two oblongs of 3 by 4 at the top and two oblongs of 4 by 5 at the bottom, together of which constitute a perfect square. The Masonic trowel is distinctive because its blade is of a specialized form. The outline of the trowel, as it becomes the geometrical basis of the emblematic square and compasses themselves, and the line between the extreme points, has the value of the letter Hod, the initial of the name of God in Hebrew. And according to Higgins, as Hod represents spirit acting upon matter, causing its particles to cohere in shapely proportions, the trowel is the instrument used by Master Masons to unite fragmentary building material upon symmetrical and orderly plans. With regard to the letter G and its significance in Masonry, Higgins says it represents the true Masonic cipher, the number 3, which is a gimel in Hebrew and gamma in Greek. He tells us that ancient philosophers viewed the great architect of the universe as having 3 aspects: creator, preserver, and transformer. Nothing is ever lost. Spirit and matter exist together and are co-eternal. Matter continually goes in and out of perception. It is constantly taking on new forms in what Higgins terms the laboratory of nature. He says everything in and about the lodge is in 3s, and this is because the number expresses permanence and power. The 3 sides of the Pythagorean triangle represent Osiris, the male or creative principle. The female principle is a 4 and the offspring is a 5. This makes 3, even if 3, 4, and 5 are added together to make 12, because 1 plus 2 makes 3. Pythagoras reduced all manifestation of form to squares, circles, and triangles, and Higgins notes that the Greek letter G, gamma, is in the form of a Mason square. The letter O is a circle, and the letter D, delta, a triangle. This gives us the word God. Higgins comments on the use of lion symbolism in Freemasonry. He discounts the viewpoint that allusions to the king of beasts mentioned in Masonic ritual are exclusively biblical. Instead, he says the significance of the lion dates from the first inception of the zodiacal system of measuring the heavens and the timing of the great astronomical cycles which utilize the sun, as the sign of the lion, as that of the summer solstice, the moment of the year when the sun is at the peak of its strength. The sign of the lion is the house of the sun. With regard to the Masonic symbolism of color, Higgins says in symbolic Masonry, 3 colors are very significant. First, the alternating black and white of the mosaic pavement, which symbolizes the dual principle, the pure white of the lily, and the blue color attributed to the lodge and the heavens. The blue color is used in lodge regalia and decorations, and Higgins says that in the original intention of the sequence of Masonic degrees, symbolic Masonry was to represent the birth, education, or development and final test of the perfected soul. He also distinguishes symbolic masonry from something he calls capitular masonry. Royal Arch Masonry, also known as capitular masonry, is the first part of the American York Rite system of Masonic degrees. In capitular masonry, he says the prevailing color is red, and much weight is given to the colors of the four veils, respectively scarlet, blue, purple, and white. Higgins says that capitular masonry symbolizes the return of the liberated soul to the source of its being. Higgins also discusses the topic of light in Masonry, and he tells us that superficially the term light applies to the intellectual development and enlightenment of a person who has previously struggled mentally with the question of man's origin, being, and destiny. However, with regard to the average Masonic initiate, the term goes much deeper, he says, and has a much fuller interpretation. He describes the true promise of light in Masonry as the return of man unsullied to the pure source of his being. He says that the source of all that exists is the product of either the luminous principle in which resides the Godhead, or of the principle of darkness, equally substantial, which wages continual war upon it. Ancient philosophies taught that man was originally one of the inhabitants of the kingdom of light, and his body was composed entirely of a luminous substance. The story surrounding the temptation and fall of man had to do with his voluntary commerce with the powers of darkness, or the intermingling of the positive and negative elements. Higgins states that it was through this admixture of light and darkness that the material world came into existence, and the male and female principle were driven from the kingdom of light to the intermediate region of earth. At this time, they took on garments of skin, meaning bodies of human flesh. From that time onward, the human soul has been seeking to return to its original state of being, even though it is ever tempted by the powers of darkness that seek to drag it down to complete and final destruction. The Freemasonic initiate in seeking light is seeking his original state of physical innocence, moral integrity, and wisdom. Higgins describes the candidate to be the ego, or self-conscious principle in man, that is seeking to restore his forfeited birthright. It is the kingdom of light and the rescue of the body of light, the original and self-sufficient state of the soul, that is the constant object of his search along his spiritual journey. Various symbols are placed along his path, which are age-old devices for revealing the mysterious connection between spirit and matter. The symbolisms of direction are taken from the points on the compass, in which the solstices and equinoxes were situated at the moment of the inception of the ancient mysteries, according to Higgins. They serve to fix the celestial east of the summer solstice in the sign of the lion as the home and source of perfect light, while its antithesis, the portal of the west, is associated with the annual death of nature. This solstice was the station of death, darkness, and dissolution. No man can regain the light, says Higgins, unless he faces it from the threshold of the great beyond. He says there alone will he be invested with the words of power that will enable him to set aside temptations, fears, doubt, and error, until in his final crisis of despair, the eternal truth, the great architect, the manifested word, frees the eternal Son of Light from his earthly prison. Then he will arrive at the house not made with hands, but the one that is eternal in the heavens, when, as a straying lamb, he wandered in the infancy of the universe.